Well, let's find out if the Shadow Housing Secretary thinks the Conservatives are finished. My instinct is that he will not. His name is Kevin Hollinrake. He is the Shadow Housing Secretary. And before we start this interview, I just have to be absolutely clear that I am a director of a housing, non-executive director of a housing company. It's called Hollinrake, and I just want to be absolutely clear on that. If I ask any questions about housing, conflict of interest, just be really clear about that. Kevin, you're very welcome this morning. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. We heard from our commentator there a minute ago, Matthew Torbett, saying that we should be encouraging Elon Musk to give money to end homelessness rather than to give it to Reform UK. What do you think about this row about whether there should be preventative measures to stop foreign donations? Are you relaxed about it, or is it something that you worry about?
Yeah, I'm pretty relaxed about it. I mean, there are rules in place in terms of foreign donors. But if there's a UK company involved, then it's deemed appropriate that money can be donated to a political party. So clearly that's a decision for those people whose money it is. Personally, I think there are more important things in politics than money. I think the most important thing that people will make a decision on who they choose to vote for is the leadership qualities of the person who is leading their party. And that's why I think Kemi Badenoch is the right person to lead our party, because she's a bold, optimistic, inspirational person who speaks her mind, and I think has the right kind of conservative values.
Has she made much of an impression so far, Kevin? Because a lot of people think that perhaps Nigel Farage is the leading opposition politician. Many Americans, and perhaps the Trump administration, thinks that as well.
Well, look, I mean, you talked about local elections earlier. Look at the local election results we've had since the general election. You've seen Labour in free fall. They lost 27 seats. We have gained 24 seats. And many of those seats when we fought against Reform. I think Reform have got 7 seats, Lib Dems gained 1. So clearly we're coming out on top in many of those battles when people are out there, our activists are out there on the streets making the case, as they've done in Dudley, as they've done in Fylde, as they've done in Stock in Essex. We've been winning those battles. So I think people can see that with the right alternative, obviously they don't like this current government, it's who's going to replace them in 2029. I think
and before that as well, Kevin, because Sean in Gloucester there in his message that I was reading out just before you came on, his concern perhaps some of the local elections will be cancelled in some way because of these moves from local authorities to kind of unitary authorities, as well as Shadow Housing Secretary or Shadow Local Government Secretary. Are you worried about that in terms of people having a say at the ballot box?
Well, always. I mean, people deserve their say. And I'm worried about the plans generally in terms of scrapping local councils. I mean, effectively, Labour government have come in, having not said they would do this, and they're going to scrap every district council, every county council in England. And they're going to make that happen. They're going to force that upon local areas. I think that's the wrong thing to do.
They would argue that actually it gives more local democracy and it puts more power and gives greater powers to those areas.
Well, if that's the case, then local people should be able to decide to take that alternative, and as we let people do. But why should it be the case that central government understands the needs and wishes of local residents better than local councillors do?
Well, when it comes to something like housing, which is also part of your brief as well, I mean, Labour say they want to build 1.5 million homes, and you know as well as I do, not just through your time as and your role as a local MP, that often there are these NIMBYs, there are people who say they don't want homes being built, but actually, especially in the southeast of England, we do need to build a load of homes. I mean, Labour's ambition is there for 1.5 million homes. Do you support that?
Yes, I do, actually. I have no problem with building more homes, and we had a similar pledge in our manifesto. And if you look over the last 10 years, our rate of delivery on average over this 10 years was the highest for 50 years. So, yes, we believe in building more homes. I have some concerns about removing powers that local councillors currently have to object to applications. They're going to remove those rights from many councillors, which I think many local residents will be surprised about. I'm also very concerned about the shift from houses being delivered in London in Nottingham, in Newcastle, in Birmingham, all of which have had their targets cut for housing, but many of those houses then put in lots of rural areas around the country. I think if you look at all this, if you connect the dots in terms of what Labour is doing, the family farms tax, in terms of the scrapping of something called the Rural Services Delivery Grant, which gives much needed funding for rural areas, in terms of plonking all the houses in rural areas, in Greenbelt and Greenfield.
So the Conservatives wouldn't scrap that? They wouldn't scrap that? They keep it as it is?
Wouldn't scrap what, sorry?
What you're talking about there, the services charge?
Rural Services Delivery Grant, is something we implemented. It's hugely important for rural areas.
Okay.
So you can deliver services into rural areas.
You've been talking about various aspects of the economy there. Lucy Powell is the leader of the House of Commons, Labour Cabinet Minister. This is what she's been saying. She spoke to Sky News a little bit earlier this morning.
Obviously, it's disappointing, these figures. Of course, we want to see these things happening faster. We want to see more growth in the economy, and we want to see that faster, but really so that it can be felt by ordinary people around the country. But this is a bit like turning around some huge oil tanker, and the underlying problems that the country faces, which are unprecedented and huge, which is why people voted for change, because they could see, quite honestly, going into that election, the country was going down the Swanee. We had living standards falling for the first time in our history going into that general election. We've had public services, particularly health and education, absolutely on their needs, in dire state of investment. And coming into government, we've had to really take some very difficult decisions. The inheritance and the public finances are even worse than we thought. We've had to take some difficult decisions.
If you don't mind...
But we are starting to turn that oil tanker around.
Lucy Powell there, Labour Cabinet Minister, talking about as she puts it, the dire economic state that the Conservatives left. Do you agree with her, Kevin Hollinrake?
I turned the oil tank around. The oil tanker was already turned around. What they've done is sunk the bloody thing. I mean, it's Christ almighty. I mean, our economy was the fastest growing economy in the world's, in the G7, which is the world's biggest economies. And that was the first 6 months of the year. Since when, the Labour, all the gloom and doom, if you heard it again there from Lucy Powell, all the gloom and doom, and then massive tax increases and massive public spending, £70 billion of increase in public spending, £40 billion of which are tax increases, and then tying the whole economy up in red tape and talking the economy down, and the economy runs on confidence, are the reasons why that supertanker is now come to a grinding halt. I mean, it is just unbelievable that they would try and blame all the mistakes they've made on somebody else. They've made the mistakes. Not a single one of them in the cabinet has any business experience whatsoever. So they'd never started and grown a business, and yet they've come in and they've whacked businesses with a huge amount of taxation, and then following that up with a huge amount of red tape, particularly in terms of the Employment Rights Bill, and giving trade unions a huge amount of powers, restoring those powers back to where they were in the 1970s, and then expect the economy to keep growing or somehow pointing the finger at blame at us, even though they're the ones that have massively damaged it.
Just turning to 2025, there'll be many challenges politically for your party, for other parties as well. We will also have Donald Trump becoming President of the United States again. The former ambassador, Lord Darroch, Kim Darroch, has said, this is what life is going to be like under Trump 2.0, like a 24/7 barroom brawl. He was reacting to the fact that one of Trump's advisors had called Peter Mandelson an absolute moron. Kim Darroch continued, you get this sort of stuff going on all of the time. You need to have a thick skin and you need to manage it and to get through it, to weather it, as it were. So Lord Mandelson is a very experienced politician. I'm sure he can cope with that kind of stuff. Do you believe Peter Mandelson is an absolute moron?
Well, it's not the words I'd have chosen, but I'm worried about the fact that Peter Mandelson is more interested in a relationship with the EU than he is with the US. And he was somebody who was very keen to remain in the European Union and has been mourned our departure. So, and we've got to look past that. Most people have moved on from that. And so somebody who can go to the US and strike a deal that's going to make it easier for UK businesses to do business in the US and other parts of the world are the most important things right now for our economy. So we need to be very US leading in terms of our approach. If you get too close to the EU, as I fear Keir Starmer will do, that will rule out a trade deal with the US, and that cannot be a good thing.
Just in about 20 seconds, Kevin, what are your hopes for 2025? What are your Christmas wishes?
Well, I really hope Labour will get their act together, because that's in the interests of every person who's listening or watching your show today. You know, I think it's going to be so important that next year brings some better news. But I think it'll take a massive reversal of the current approach from Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner for that to happen. So that's what I wish for. I'm a hopeful. I'm not too hopeful right now.
Well, a Merry Christmas to you nonetheless. Thank you, Kevin Hollinrake, Shadow Housing Secretary.